Oftentimes the Christian takes the hit that he or she who is a follower of Jesus Christ is the only one who lays claim to exclusivity. That is not true. Gautama Buddha was born a Hindu, and he renounced two of the fundamental doctrines of Hinduism, the authority of the Vedas and the caste system. He could not accept those two, went on his own journey in search of enlightenment, and came, of course, with the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the ultimate extinguishing of desire in his nirvanic pursuit. So he turned his belief away from the religion of his birth in order to find a different answer. Islam is also exclusivistic in its claim, in all of its precepts and its 5 pillars and so on. What about these contradistinctions? The first thing we need to know is there are distinctions, there are fundamental differences. At best, there are superficial similarities. I often hear the question posed wrongly. They'll say, aren't all religions fundamentally the same and superficially different? No, they are fundamentally different, and at best they are superficially similar. What are the fundamental claims, for example? In Buddhism, the goal is to extinguish hunger, extinguish desire. I remember talking to the first woman monk who was from Thailand to be ordained into the Buddhist priesthood. But Thai Buddhists do not ordain women, so she went to Sri Lanka to be ordained, and she has a PhD in philosophy from McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, and Waterloo, I guess, Ontario, McMaster University there. Got her PhD in philosophy, and she gave me the first interview. We chatted for well over an hour, one-on-one, and I sort of angled into some questions because I didn't want to be too discourteous. And one of the things I said to her is, I hear you're married. And she said, yes. I said, you have children? She said, yes. I said, but you're living in a temple by yourself? She said, yes. I said, do you not see your children? She started crying. She said, I have a car. I said, you have a car? She said, yeah. I said, okay. So she drove herself because she can't allow a man to drive her, she said, so she has to drive herself. And she says, every evening at the end of the day, I try and meet up with one of my children. She said, this is the hardest part of my life. I said, so you are on the journey to extinguishing the desire to be with your children. Is that right? Is that a fair assessment? She kept quiet. And then I said this. I said, the Dalai Lama has as his primary pursuit now the freedom of Tibet. She said, that's right. I said, why does he desire that? She looked at me and she said, we try not to get into these philosophical questions. Let's just say that he chooses to. You take a look at other world religions and see where these 4 questions are dealt with. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. These 4 questions have to be answered in 2 ways. Follow me, please. Every particular answer has to correspond to truth, either through empirical form of measurement or through the logical reasoning process. And when those 4 answers are put together, they must cohere and not be incoherent. So the 2 tests, correspondence and coherence, I guarantee you, only in the Judeo-Christian worldview will you find these 4 questions answered with corresponding truthfulness and with the coherence of a worldview. Let me take just one example, and I don't say this to slight, but this is a fact and we have to deal with it. I've been invited in many, many Islamic countries, and I have open forums there, and going to go to one of the toughest Islamic countries within the next few weeks. They've hosted me in many parts there, and we've had dialogues. I want to give to you 2 things. In the Quran, it is the only historically claimed document that denies that Jesus Christ was actually crucified or died on the cross. Denies that. The Greek historians say he died on the cross. Roman historians say that. Pagan historians say that. Jewish historians say that. And Christian historians say that. The Quran is the only one that says it appeared to him that he died, but he didn't actually die on the cross. So historically, it is making an affirmation that is really historically untrue. I got into a discussion with Sheikh Hussein of the leading Shiite cleric in Damascus, Syria, a real gentleman. For over 3 hours we talked with an interpreter between us and an audience listening in. I was allowed to ask him one question about his faith, and he was allowed to ask me one question about mine. There was nothing, no rancor, no adversarial stance, just a perspective and counter-perspective and back and forth. It's the best way to do it, really. At the end of it, Sheikh Hussein looked at me. He was very respectful through the whole time, always referred to me as Professor Zacharias. And then at the end, he looked at me, leaned over, and he said, "You know, Professor, I think the time has come for us in the Islamic world to stop asking if Jesus Christ died and to start asking why." I said to him, "May I quote you on that, sir?" He said, "Yes, you may. I'm hopefully going to go there before long, and I hope we can meet up again." Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. The Judeo-Christian worldview is not the only one that claims exclusivity, but it's the only one that takes those 4 questions with corresponding answers that are truthful and coherent answers that stand the test of time. And the ultimate answer of the resurrection from the dead that gives you hope and meaning. I see we have one more question left, and that's the sign here. I'll be happy to take that.
For you is that through my cursory review of most religions, it seems like they all have a common thread of answering the question which seems to plague us all, which is what happens to us when we die. It's the one question I think that a lot of us have difficulty with because we cannot answer it. And so it seems like this common thread is it gives us hope for the afterlife, something better than what we have right now. And I feel like a lot of religions, that what they do is they put forth codes or rules of conduct to help us live a good life so that we can achieve this afterlife. And so given this commonality, what makes you believe that Christianity is the correct or right religion?
Great question. Great question. And your name is?
Suketu.
Spell that for me.
Suketu.
Suketu. I think you've asked a very, very important question. First of all, let me qualify it a little bit, and I'm sure you already know that not all religions talk about an afterlife. Mainly the monotheistic ones do. The pantheistic ones are reincarnation. Even the reincarnation between Buddhism and Hinduism is a little different. In Hinduism, it's the transference of identity one into another in a different form. But in Buddhism, it's not even sure whether it's the identity that's transmigrated or just another form of essence that has emerged. A worldview is built not on one line of argument. A worldview is built on a connected series of arguments. And if a worldview were just built on one line of argument, I think this is the mistake naturalism often makes. It'll take sort of one argument that it has in its favor and forget all the myriad other questions that emerge. When I look at the person and the work of Jesus Christ, this is the most important question I had to ask. Now, granted, I asked it in reverse fashion because I was on a bed of suicide, a Bible was brought to me, and I prayed a prayer of desperation. I grant you that. I just had no hope. But I read the verse, Jesus said, "Because I live, you also shall live." I just said, this is talking about a life that I don't have. And maybe this is the life I need. And so I prayed that prayer. But then I made a prayer commitment right on that bed. I was 17, and I said, "Jesus, if you're who you claim to be, I will leave no stone unturned in my pursuit of truth." Because my goal was truth. Pragmatically, it made sense for me to hang on to a life jacket that was thrown my way. But then I began my years and years and years of study. When you look at the life of Christ from the prophetic schema of hundreds of years before, where he was going to be born, what he was going to do, what his name was going to be called, how the manner of birth was, the manner of life he was going to lead, how he was going to die, and then the resurrection from the dead. The uniqueness about the New Testament and Old Testament scriptures, it's not a single author, it's multiple authors. As you know, 66 books, 40 different authors have edited it, and it is interesting that Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, who wrote 1/3 of it, came in a reverse fashion to the rest of them. The disciples came birth, life, death, resurrection, And that's how they knew Jesus. Not so with Saul, who became Paul. He said, when he encountered the risen Christ, he said that I may know him, the power of the resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering, being made conformable unto his death. He started with the resurrection, but he said he needed to understand the cross, because he came in reverse chronological order, but he encountered the risen Christ. The conversion of Saul of Tarsus and Thomas especially, these two dramatic conversions are powerful witnesses of what happened. Saul, who was killing them, he was standing there watching Stephen being martyred and kept the clothes of those who were stoning him. Thomas, who said, I'm not going to believe until I see the resurrected Christ myself. And he went to India, where there are 330 million deities. And he went and preached the gospel of Jesus and paid with his own life. That kind of dramatic transformation took place not because of just one event, but a connected series of events. So, here's the bottom line. A worldview is built around 4 questions: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And there are 3 tests for truth: logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance. Logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance. 3 tests for 4 questions. And when you take the prophecy of Christ hundreds of years before, from his virgin birth, you take the purity of his life, unmatched, totally unmatched till this very day. Then the death that he promised for the forgiveness of sins, and then the resurrection. As an Easterner, I asked myself this question. When Jesus was asked how he was going to demonstrate it, if he were a fake, he would have said, I'm going to spiritually rise again. And they would never be able to falsify it. But he said, I'm bodily going to rise again. That is an empirically falsifiable dictum. All they would have had to show was the body and say, where is he? You said he was going to rise again. So it's in the whole schema of the prophetic corpus, the hundreds of years, the multiple authors, pointing towards the same person, from his virgin birth to the purity of his life, to the death on the cross for forgiveness when he said, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they are doing. And then the resurrection again. My 4 questions are answered correspondingly with truth on specific questions and coherently when all of the questions are put together and answers are given. So to me, first of all religions are not the same. They are actually, people say they're fundamentally the same, superficially different. Actually, they're fundamentally different and at best superficially similar. And the fundamental difference that you see in Jesus Christ is in his uniqueness and exclusivity of his claim and the embrace that he gives to all humanity, the perfection of his life, the purity of his life, the death and the resurrection. To me, that coherence of his answers convinces me that he is who he claimed to be. And truth, by definition, is exclusive. All truth claims to be exclusive. Buddhism claims to be exclusive. Hinduism claims to be exclusive. They all have exclusivity built into that. But in the person of Christ, you see the demonstration in his birth, life, death, and resurrection. So I say, to me, I am convinced that because it coheres and because I have personally verified it in my own life, and you can do that too, and find that experience, and that he is who he claimed to be.
Thank you.
Thank you.